What if I told you that the trait you hate most about yourself is actually your superpower in disguise? That the thing you've been trying to fix, suppress, or hide from the world is precisely what contains your greatest potential for success, creativity, and authentic power? I know it sounds impossible. You've probably spent years being told you're too sensitive, too aggressive, too chaotic, or too selfish. You've tried to become someone else, to fit into boxes that were never meant for you, and every time you failed to maintain that false version of yourself, you felt like a failure. But here's what nobody told you. What if you've been approaching this completely backwards? What if the very traits you've been rejecting are not obstacles to overcome, but gold waiting to be mined? You see, there's something happening right now in your psyche that you're not even aware of. Something Carl Jung discovered that revolutionized how we understand human potential. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why your biggest weakness isn't something to eliminate. It's your greatest strength waiting to be integrated. Have you ever noticed how the people you judge most harshly seem to possess something you secretly wish you had? The arrogant person who speaks their mind without apologizing. The emotional person who connects deeply with others. The selfish person who never seems exhausted from giving too much. There's a reason these traits both repel and attract you, and that reason reveals everything about the hidden treasure you've been rejecting in yourself. Jung called this treasure the shadow, but unlike how most people think about shadows, this isn't about your dark side or evil impulses. Your shadow is simply the collection of all the qualities, traits, and potentials you were taught to reject about yourself. It's the parts of you that didn't fit your family's expectations, your school's requirements, or society's narrow definitions of who you should be. Think about it. When you were a child, you were naturally whole. You felt your anger when something was unfair. You expressed your joy without embarrassment. You set boundaries when something felt wrong. You were creative, spontaneous, authentic. But slowly, through 1,000 small corrections, you learned which parts of yourself were acceptable and which needed to be hidden. Your parents said, "Don't be so dramatic." Your teachers said, "Stop being disruptive." Your friends said, "You're being too intense." And piece by piece, you began to construct a persona, a socially acceptable version of yourself that could earn love, approval, and belonging. But here's what nobody told you about this process. When you rejected those parts of yourself, you didn't make them disappear. You just pushed them into the basement of your consciousness, where they've been growing stronger, more concentrated, more powerful ever since. And now, years later, you're exhausted. You're tired of being the nice person who can't say no. You're drained from being the rational person who never gets to feel. You're suffocating as the responsible person who never gets to play. You feel like something essential is missing, like you're living someone else's life. That's because you are. But here's where it gets interesting. Jung discovered something that changes everything. He realized that the shadow isn't the opposite of your gifts. The shadow is your gifts, in their raw, unintegrated, powerful form. Every weakness you see in yourself is actually a strength that's been suppressed, distorted, or turned against itself. Let me show you what I mean. Think about the person who calls themselves too emotional. What's really happening here? This person has probably been told their whole life to calm down, to be more rational, to stop overreacting. So they've learned to suppress their emotional nature. But emotion isn't weakness. Emotion is the raw material of empathy, intuition, creativity, and authentic connection. The too emotional person isn't cursed with a flaw. They're blessed with a gift they've never learned to use properly. Or consider the person who believes they're too selfish. This usually means someone who was taught that their own needs don't matter, that caring for themselves is wrong, that they must always put others first. So they've pushed their natural self-advocacy into the shadow. But what they call selfishness is actually the capacity for healthy boundaries, self-respect, and leadership. They have the raw material to become someone who can protect not just themselves, but others who can't protect themselves. What about the aggressive person? Someone who's learned to suppress their natural assertiveness because it made others uncomfortable. But aggression, in its healthy form, is passion, drive, the ability to fight for what matters, to protect what you love, to refuse to accept injustice. The person who fears their own aggression often has the soul of a warrior, a protector, a champion of the weak. Even the person who sees themselves as chaotic or unreliable is often someone whose natural creativity and spontaneity have been pathologized. What others call chaos, they might call adaptability, innovation, the ability to find new solutions when old systems fail. They have the entrepreneur's mind, the artist's soul, the revolutionary's spirit. But here's the crucial point. These gifts remain dangerous and destructive as long as they stay in the shadow. Unintegrated emotion becomes manipulation or victim mentality. Unintegrated selfishness becomes narcissism. Unintegrated aggression becomes bullying or violence. Unintegrated chaos becomes self-sabotage. The shadow doesn't need to be eliminated. It needs to be acknowledged, understood, and consciously integrated into your whole personality. And this is where Jung's real genius reveals itself. He understood that psychological wholeness isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming complete. It's about reclaiming all the parts of yourself you've disowned and learning to express them in healthy, conscious ways. But why is this so difficult? Why do we resist integrating our shadow even when we intellectually understand its value? The answer lies in what Jung called projection. You see, we don't just reject our shadow qualities in ourselves, we project them onto other people, and then we judge them, criticize them, feel superior to them, or sometimes feel inexplicably attracted to them. Think about your strongest emotional reactions to other people. The co-worker who always has to be right. The friend who's so dramatic about everything. The family member who's completely selfish. The intensity of your reaction reveals how much of your own rejected self you're seeing in them. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The more you judge others for these traits, the more you're rejecting them in yourself. And the more you reject them in yourself, the more they control you from the shadows. This is why shadow work is so challenging. It forces you to admit that the qualities you hate in others also exist in you. It asks you to stop being the victim of your own projections and start taking responsibility for your whole self. And it requires you to give up the comfortable illusion that you're only your good qualities, that you're only light, only positive, only acceptable. But here's what happens when you start to do this work consciously. When you begin to acknowledge your shadow without judgment, something miraculous occurs. You stop being controlled by these rejected parts of yourself. Instead of unconsciously acting them out in destructive ways, you can begin to express them consciously, appropriately, powerfully. The person who integrates their emotional nature doesn't become too emotional. They become emotionally intelligent, empathetic, intuitive. They can feel what others feel, connect authentically, create art that moves people, make decisions from wisdom rather than just logic. The person who integrates their selfishness doesn't become narcissistic. They become self-respecting, boundaried, capable of leadership. They can say no without guilt, pursue their dreams without apology, and model healthy self-care for others. The person who integrates their aggression doesn't become violent. They become passionate, driven, protective. They can fight for justice, defend the vulnerable, pursue their goals with unstoppable determination. And the person who integrates their chaos doesn't become destructive. They become creative, innovative, adaptable. They can think outside the box, find solutions others miss, bring new energy to stagnant situations. But integration isn't just an intellectual process. It requires practical work, daily choices, the courage to act differently than you've been conditioned to act. And this is where most people get stuck. They understand the theory, but they don't know how to actually do the work. So let me give you some concrete steps. First, start paying attention to your judgments. When you find yourself having a strong emotional reaction to someone else's behavior, ask yourself, how do I possess this same quality? Don't dismiss this question. Sit with it. Look for evidence. You might find that you express this trait in different circumstances or in more subtle ways, or that you used to express it before you learned to suppress it. Second, Investigate your childhood conditioning. What were you told was wrong with you? What aspects of your personality did your family, teachers, or peers consistently try to change? These rejected qualities are often your greatest gifts in disguise. The child who was told to stop being so dramatic might have the soul of an artist or performer. The child who was called too stubborn might have the backbone of a leader or entrepreneur. Third, pay attention to where you feel drained or inauthentic in your life. These are usually areas where you're forcing yourself to be someone you're not, where you're suppressing natural qualities that want to emerge. What would it feel like to stop forcing these patterns? What would it feel like to honor the rejected parts of yourself? And fourth, start experimenting with small expressions of your shadow qualities. If you're always the nice person, practice setting a small boundary. If you're always the rational person, let yourself feel and express an emotion. If you're always the responsible person, do something spontaneous. If you're always the selfless person, do something just for you without explaining or justifying it to anyone. But here's what you need to understand. This work isn't easy, and it's not without consequences. When you start integrating your shadow, you become less predictable to the people around you. You stop fitting into the neat categories they've created for you. Some people will be uncomfortable with your evolution. They might accuse you of changing, of being selfish, of not being yourself anymore. But here's the truth they're not ready to face. You're not becoming less yourself. You're becoming more yourself. You're reclaiming parts of your authentic nature that you abandoned to keep others comfortable. And not everyone will be happy about this. The people who benefited from your people-pleasing won't like your new boundaries. The people who felt superior to your emotional suppression won't like your new authenticity. The people who took advantage of your selflessness won't like your new self-respect. Their discomfort isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong, it's a sign that you're doing something right. Because here's what Jung understood about human nature. Most people are living at a fraction of their potential because they're afraid to claim their full power. They're afraid to be whole, complex, multifaceted human beings. They'd rather be partial, predictable, safe. But you don't have to make that choice anymore. When you integrate your shadow, you don't become perfect. You become powerful. You become complete. You become authentically yourself in all your contradiction, complexity, and strength. You stop being a reaction to other people's expectations and start being a conscious creator of your own life. And this is where the real magic happens. When you stop rejecting parts of yourself, you stop projecting them onto others. This means you can see people more clearly, without the distortion of your own unowned qualities. You become more compassionate, more understanding, more capable of real connection. When you reclaim your emotional nature, you can connect with others authentically without losing yourself. When you reclaim your selfishness, you can care for others without depleting yourself. When you reclaim your aggression, you can protect what matters without destroying what doesn't deserve destruction. When you reclaim your chaos, you can create and innovate without destroying stability. You become what Jung called an individuated person, someone who has done the work of becoming whole, who has integrated their light and shadow, who can respond to life from their full authentic power rather than from a partial, conditioned version of themselves. But this process requires courage. The courage to disappoint people who prefer your smaller self. The courage to be misunderstood by those who only knew your persona. The courage to claim power that you've been taught doesn't belong to you. The courage to be human in all your beautiful, terrible, magnificent complexity. So I ask you now, looking directly into your eyes, what shadow quality have you been rejecting in yourself? What trait do you hate in others that might actually be your own disowned gift? What part of your authentic nature have you been hiding to keep others comfortable? Because here's the final truth Jung discovered. Your individuation, your becoming whole, isn't just about you. When you integrate your shadow, you stop unconsciously acting it out in destructive ways. You stop projecting it onto others. You stop contributing to the collective unconsciousness that keeps humanity trapped in cycles of blame, judgment, and separation. When you become whole, you give others permission to become whole too. When you stop hiding your authentic nature, You make it safer for others to reveal theirs. When you integrate your shadow gold, you become part of the solution to humanity's greatest problems. Your biggest weakness has been waiting your entire life to become your greatest strength. The question isn't whether you have shadow gold. The question is whether you'll have the courage to mine it. Are you ready to stop being ashamed of your authentic nature? Are you ready to reclaim the parts of yourself you've been taught to reject? Are you ready to discover why your biggest weakness contains your greatest strength? The choice is yours. But remember, the shadow you're afraid to face isn't your enemy. It's your abandoned treasure, waiting for you to come home.